Ever notice how some conversations leave you feeling drained? Not angry, not upset, just confused, like something shifted beneath your feet, but you can't pinpoint exactly when or how. You didn't lose your temper, you didn't say anything unreasonable, yet somehow you're the one backtracking, second-guessing every word, wondering where you went wrong. Here's what most men don't realize. The control didn't start with what you said. It started with what was said to you. Real control doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need raised voices or dramatic confrontations. It shows up disguised as concern, wrapped in reasonable-sounding phrases delivered at precisely the moment you're most vulnerable to them. And if you can't identify these phrases, something dangerous happens. You don't fight back. You don't even recognize there's something to fight. You simply hand over your autonomy, piece by piece, thinking you're being understanding. In this video, I'm walking you through specific phrases that sound completely innocent but quietly shift power in ways you don't notice until it's already happened. Let's break down exactly how this works. Number 1, I just need you to understand how I feel. This phrase sounds emotionally healthy, doesn't it? Communication, vulnerability, sharing feelings. On the surface, it looks like exactly what relationships are supposed to involve. But here's what's actually happening underneath. This isn't an invitation to mutual understanding. It's a demand for emotional agreement. The subtle difference matters more than you think. When someone says, I just need you to understand how I feel, they're not opening a dialogue. They're establishing that their emotional experience is the priority, the baseline, the thing that must be validated before anything else can proceed. Your perspective becomes secondary. Your feelings get shelved. Your concerns wait. Psychologically, this works because men are problem solvers. When presented with an emotional need, the instinct is to meet it, to provide, to fix. So you listen, you nod, you acknowledge, you validate. And you assume that once her feelings are understood, there'll be space for yours. Except that space never comes, because the conversation ends the moment she feels heard. There's no reciprocal step where she says, now help me understand how you feel. The framework doesn't allow for it. Her emotions were the subject. Yours were never on the agenda. Over time, this creates an imbalance you can feel but can't quite articulate. You start leading with validation in every disagreement. You cushion your concerns with reassurance. You make sure she's comfortable before you're honest. And slowly, your emotional reality becomes something you manage privately while hers gets constant airtime. Here's the line that matters. Understanding should go both ways, or it's not understanding, it's compliance. Number 2, I don't want to fight about this. This one's brilliant because it sounds like maturity. Who wants to fight? Fighting is exhausting, unproductive, damaging. So when she says, I don't want to fight about this, your immediate instinct is probably to agree. Neither do you. Conflict avoidance feels reasonable. But watch what happens next. The conversation doesn't continue in a calmer way. It stops. Completely. The topic gets shelved, not because it's resolved, but because raising it further would apparently constitute fighting. This phrase redefines any disagreement as aggression. It makes your attempt to discuss something into the problem itself. Not the issue you wanted to address, the fact that you're still talking about it. So you back off. You tell yourself it's not worth the tension. You choose peace. Except it's not actually peace. It's silence. And silence doesn't resolve anything. It just postpones the conversation indefinitely while the underlying issue compounds. Psychologically, this trains you to associate honesty with conflict and conflict with failure. You learn that bringing things up leads to discomfort, tension, or withdrawal. So you stop bringing things up. You tolerate more. You adjust your expectations. You convince yourself that some things just aren't worth addressing. But here's what that really means. You've accepted that her comfort matters more than your clarity, that avoiding her frustration is more important than resolving your concern. And once that pattern sets in, control doesn't require effort anymore. It just requires you to keep choosing silence over truth. Read this carefully. When difficult conversations are framed as optional, only one person's boundaries actually matter. Number 3. You're making this bigger than it is. This phrase doesn't challenge what happened. It challenges how you responded to what happened. And that distinction is everything. When she says you're making this bigger than it is, she's not disagreeing with the facts. She's questioning your judgment about what those facts mean. The problem shifts from her behavior to your reaction, from what she did to how you're interpreting it. This is minimization disguised as perspective. It sounds like she's offering balance, trying to keep things rational, helping you see that maybe you're overthinking. But what's actually happening is that your emotional response is being labeled as disproportionate before the actual issue gets addressed. Psychologically, this creates doubt at the worst possible moment, right when you're trying to express something that matters to you. Instead of defending your point, you start defending your right to have a point. You begin wondering if maybe you are overreacting, if maybe this really isn't a big deal, if maybe you should just let it go. And that hesitation is the goal. Because once you're questioning your own perception, you stop trusting your instincts. You second-guess yourself before you speak. You edit your concerns down to only the ones that feel big enough to justify bringing up. And even then, you soften them, frame them carefully, apologize for even mentioning them. Over time, this doesn't just affect one conversation. It affects how you process everything. You start measuring your feelings against an invisible standard of what's reasonable to be bothered by. And that standard keeps moving, always just out of reach of whatever you're actually experiencing. Here's the truth. If your feelings are consistently labeled as excessive, the issue isn't your sensitivity, it's who's defining what's acceptable to feel. Number 4. I'm only saying this because I care. This phrase wraps criticism in concern. It presents judgment as love, and that combination makes it nearly impossible to reject without seeming ungrateful or defensive. When someone prefaces a comment with, "I'm only saying this because I care," they're not just sharing an observation. They're framing any resistance you have as proof that you don't appreciate their concern. The setup is perfect. Either you accept the criticism or you reject the care. There's no option to question whether the criticism's actually valid or helpful. Psychologically, this exploits something deep in most men: the desire to be valued by someone whose opinion matters. When criticism comes from someone you care about, wrapped in language that suggests it's for your benefit, rejecting it feels like rejecting the relationship itself. So you listen, you consider it, you try to improve, even when the feedback is really just control disguised as coaching, even when it chips away at your confidence rather than building you up, even when it slowly reshapes you into someone more compliant, more hesitant, more dependent on her approval. Notice what never gets questioned: whether the criticism is actually accurate, whether it's being delivered with your best interests in mind, whether caring should include the freedom to disagree without consequences. The pattern looks like this. She criticizes. You defend yourself. She reframes the criticism as care. Now you're not just wrong, you're ungrateful for not accepting her help. So you apologize for resisting and take the criticism to heart, even when your gut tells you something's off. Read this slowly. Care doesn't require you to shrink. If someone's love makes you smaller, it's not love, it's leverage. Number 5. After everything I've done for you. This phrase turns the relationship into a transaction. It takes shared history and reframes it as debt, and debt creates obligation. Obligation creates compliance. When she says, "After everything I've done for you," she's not reminiscing. She's invoking a balance sheet you didn't know existed. Suddenly, her past actions aren't expressions of care, they're investments, and investments expect returns. Psychologically, this hits hard because most men don't track relationship contributions like credits and debits. You give because you want to, you assume she does the same. So when effort gets weaponized as evidence of what you owe, it catches you completely off guard. Your immediate response is probably guilt. Have you been taking her for granted? Have you not appreciated what she's done? Are you failing to reciprocate? These questions flood in, and while you're processing them, the original issue, whatever you were trying to discuss, disappears completely. Now the conversation is about her sacrifice and your inadequacy. Not because that's accurate, but because guilt is easier to trigger than genuine accountability. Here's how this pattern reinforces itself. You feel guilty. You compensate by doing more. Temporarily things improve, but the ledger doesn't reset. The next time there's conflict, the same phrase returns, now with even more evidence. And because you've been giving more, it feels even more legitimate. This creates a cycle where effort doesn't build equity, it builds expectation. You're not getting closer to balance, you're falling further into debt that can't actually be repaid because the terms keep changing. Read this carefully. Healthy relationships don't keep score. When someone tallies their contributions to prove your obligation, love has been replaced by leverage. Number 6, you always or you never. These absolutes, always, never, constantly, every time, are linguistic traps. They take a specific moment and explode it into your entire character. One instance becomes a pattern. One mistake becomes your identity. When she says, "You always do this," or "You never listen," she's not describing behavior. She's assigning blame to who you are as a person. And that shift is critical because you can change what you do, but defending who you are puts you in an impossible position. Psychologically, absolutes trigger defensiveness instantly, because they're almost never true. You don't always do anything. You don't never listen. So your first instinct is to disprove the absolute. That's not true. Just last week, But notice what just happened. You're now defending your character instead of addressing the actual issue. The conversation derailed from whatever specific thing occurred to a referendum on whether you're fundamentally flawed. And in that battle, there's no winning. Even if you prove the absolute is wrong, you've spent your energy justifying yourself rather than being heard. This is how always and never function as control mechanisms. They make resolution impossible because the problem is no longer situational. It's essential to who you are. And if the problem is you, the only solution is changing yourself to meet standards that shift every time you think you've met them. Over time, these absolutes accumulate. Each one reinforces a narrative about your inadequacy. You internalize them. You start seeing yourself through that lens, and eventually, you don't even need her to say them anymore. You police yourself based on the character she's constructed. Here's what you need to understand. People who respect you address actions. People who control you attack character. When every disagreement becomes proof of your fundamental flaws, you're not in a relationship. You're in a judgment system designed to keep you insecure. Number 7. I'm just being honest. Honesty is a virtue, right? We're supposed to value truth-telling, directness, authenticity. So when someone says, "I'm just being honest," it feels like they're doing something admirable, even if what follows is harsh. But here's the reality. "I'm just being honest" is often a disclaimer that excuses cruelty. It reframes hurtful comments as necessary truth, making any objection to tone or delivery seem like you can't handle reality. When she says something cutting, and follows it with, "I'm just being honest." She's not inviting discussion, she's shutting it down. Because now, if you express that her words hurt, you're not responding to legitimate pain, you're being oversensitive to facts. Psychologically, this exploits the cultural value placed on honesty while stripping away the equally important value of kindness. Truth without consideration isn't wisdom, it's weaponized candor. It allows someone to say anything, however damaging, and defend it as virtue. Notice what this does over time. You become afraid to react, because reacting means you can't handle honesty. So you absorb criticism, insults, or harsh judgments without protest. You tell yourself that if it's true, you should accept it, even when the delivery is designed to wound rather than help. This creates a dynamic where her bluntness is framed as courage, and your hurt is framed as weakness. She gets credit for transparency. You get blamed for fragility. And the actual content, whether her honesty is accurate, fair, or necessary, never gets examined. Read this. Honesty without empathy is just cruelty with better PR. If someone uses truth as permission to hurt you, they're not being authentic. They're being abusive. Number 8. Why can't you just be happy? This question sounds simple, almost innocent, but it's not asking why you're unhappy. It's asking why you're not hiding it better. When she says, "Why can't you just be happy?" after you've expressed concern, frustration, or dissatisfaction, she's not trying to understand your emotional state. She's expressing frustration that you have one. Your unhappiness has become an inconvenience, something that disrupts the peace she expects you to maintain. Psychologically, this phrase teaches you that negative emotions are burdens, that expressing anything other than contentment makes you difficult, ungrateful, or problematic. So you learn to perform happiness even when you're not feeling it. You smile. You say you're fine. You keep struggles private. This isn't emotional management, it's emotional suppression. And suppression doesn't eliminate feelings. It just drives them underground, where they become resentment, detachment, or eventual breakdown. Here's the progression. First, your emotions were questioned. Then they were dismissed. Now they're inconvenient. The message is clear. Your inner life matters less than her outer comfort. Your role is to stabilize the relationship by staying positive regardless of what you're actually experiencing. Over time, this creates profound loneliness because you can't share difficulties. You can't process stress openly. You can't be human in your complexity. You can only be the version of yourself that doesn't disturb her equilibrium. Read this carefully. A relationship where only one person is allowed to have problems isn't a partnership, it's a performance. Number 9, you're going to leave me anyway. This phrase is pure manipulation disguised as vulnerability. When she says, "You're going to leave me anyway," she's not expressing fear, she's creating insurance. By preemptively positioning herself as the victim of your future abandonment, she accomplishes several things simultaneously. First, she makes leaving emotionally expensive. If you ever do leave, you're now confirming her fear, playing into her narrative, becoming the villain she predicted. Second, she generates sympathy and reassurance. Your immediate response is probably to comfort, to promise you're not going anywhere, to prove her wrong. Psychologically, this is a loyalty test disguised as insecurity. It forces you to demonstrate commitment repeatedly, not because the relationship is genuinely at risk, but because she's manufactured the crisis. Notice what this does to your freedom. You can't express frustration without triggering abandonment fears. You can't set boundaries without seeming like you're pulling away. You can't prioritize anything else without it being framed as evidence you're already gone. Your entire emotional range gets compressed into constant reassurance. This creates a prison of guilt. You stay not because you want to, but because leaving would validate her. Prophecy. You tolerate things you shouldn't because walking away feels cruel. You sacrifice your own needs because her insecurity has become the relationship's central organizing principle. Here's the truth. People who are secure don't hold relationships hostage to predicted abandonment. When someone repeatedly claims you're going to leave, they're not afraid of loss. They're preventing escape. Number 10. I guess I'm just the bad guy. This is the final move. After everything else, after your emotions have been questioned, minimized, and reframed, this phrase flips the entire script. When she says, I guess I'm just the bad guy, she's not accepting responsibility. She's playing the victim of your accountability. She's taking your legitimate concern and turning it into persecution. And now you're not discussing the issue anymore. You're comforting her about the consequences of discussing the issue. Psychologically, this is brilliant because it exploits empathy. You don't want her to feel attacked. You don't want to be unfair. So when she frames herself as the villain in your story, your instinct is to backtrack, to soften, to reassure her that's not what you meant. And just like that, the power dynamic inverts completely. You came to her with a problem. You're leaving comforting her about your problem. The issue never got addressed, the behavior never changed, but now she's the injured party, and you're the aggressor for having brought it up at all. This is how control becomes self-sustaining. You stop bringing things up because the cost is too high. Not anger that you could handle, but the emotional labor of managing her feelings about your feelings. That's exhausting. So you choose silence, you internalize, you cope privately. Read this slowly. When expressing hurt makes you the perpetrator, you're not in a relationship. You're in a system designed to keep you quiet. If you look at all these phrases together, something becomes impossible to ignore. They're not random, they're not isolated, they form a system. Each phrase does something specific. One questions your emotions, another minimizes your concerns, another creates guilt, another manufactures insecurity. But together, they create a comprehensive framework where your judgment, your boundaries, your emotional reality, all of it becomes negotiable while hers remains fixed. And here's what most men never realize. Being controlled doesn't mean you're weak. It means you cared. It means you tried. It means you gave someone the benefit of the doubt longer than you should have because you wanted the relationship to work. These phrases target exactly that quality. Your willingness to be reasonable, patient, understanding. That's why they work so well. They exploit your strengths and reframe them as obligations. But awareness changes everything. The moment you can name what's happening, you stop personalizing it. You stop arguing with yourself. You stop mistaking manipulation for depth. And you start setting boundaries, not loudly, not emotionally, but clearly, calmly from a place of self-respect that doesn't need permission. Because control only works where confusion lives. Once you trust yourself again, the whole system loses power. These phrases become transparent, and the relationship either recalibrates into something mutual, or it reveals itself for what it always was. If this video clarified something you felt but couldn't explain, subscribe. This channel is about understanding relationship psychology without the noise. Hit like if any of these phrases sounded uncomfortably familiar, and share this with someone who needs clarity right now. Drop a comment telling me which phrase you've encountered most. Let's talk about it.